everyone to the June 22nd, 2020 City of Tualatin work session. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight, starting off with our parks condition assessments, led, I believe, by Ross and Rich.
Well, thank you, Mayor and councilors. Appreciate your time tonight. We're here to talk about parks condition assessments, and let me share my screen with you with the PowerPoint we put together that's on the city website. Okay. Full screen mode. Okay. The last time we discussed parks condition assessment was at the council advance, and you might recall we have I love this picture, by the way. Fantastic view of TCP and the river. We have a park system that's approximately 25 to 30 years old, and we have a number of assets, amenities within our system that are aging. And so we wanted to go through the process of actually figuring out what condition are those assets, amenities in. And so we're going to walk through that work. Our staff, our whole team has been busy over the past few months compiling this information and putting it into presentation that we're doing tonight. So first of all, the asset assessments, looking at every single asset in our system and asking ourselves the question of what condition it's in, what's the state of it, and so we'll walk you through that work. But the purpose is really to intentionally manage our assets, that we're not waiting until our assets are in terrible shape. We're shifting how we're managing our assets. And so to do that, you have to have data. You have to know what condition our assets are in, where are they in their lifespan, and what work needs to be done. And then how do we prioritize that work once we identify those needs? And it's in line, this is work that's called for in the master plan. And so it's really, as we discussed at the council advance, looking at our deferred maintenance and the condition of our system overall. So this next slide is about what it is. It's a strategic approach to it. It's not waiting until there's a real issue or an emergency level issue that we need to attend to. It's about planning for those replacements and those renovations of major assets and minor assets within our system. It helps us make decisions about when and how and where we're going to allocate our funds, and within a particular life cycle of an amenity. With this data, with this data that we've collected, we're allowing ourselves to think about how we're managing our assets completely differently, which frees up our organization and our people and our staff time to maintain the parks in a different way. It's a comprehensive review of our risk and those needs within our system that align with high risk. So let's go back one slide here. So this is this next slide is the how. So we are looking at how we can make our level of service sustainable. So on a particular asset, if a particular asset requires more maintenance to it and it's in bad shape, it's pulling away staff from other operations within the parks. And it helps us make informed investment decisions. And it's all about our culture. And this is the way that we're approaching everything we do, is with an intentional, strategic approach using data to inform our decisions. So you can see this 1 to 5 scale. You might recall this from our council advance. So assets that we scored were either a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 1 meaning something brand new, in really good shape, fully accessible, no issues. A 5 being an item that's in full deterioration, has a safety issue, or has a high risk to it, and it may not be accessible. And then, of course, 3 is right that middle ground in between those two points. So this work is directly aligned with the Council 2030 vision, that we are maintaining and offering high quality gathering spaces that are operationally sustainable, fiscally, financially sustainable, that are fully accessible and equitable throughout our community, and that we're creating, as we're making renovations and investments in our system to these assets that are aging, we're doing it in an environmentally responsible way. We're making improvements environmentally. So let's look at the system. Here is a roll-up of the condition. So we looked at 739 different assets within amenities within our system, 739. So we visited every one of those, and we scored on that 1 to 5 scale. And so you can see on the right side of this slide the summary of what that work resulted in, the specific data. And so you can see 31% of our assets and amenities within our system are a 3. They're right in the middle. They're neither brand new nor are they aged out. The reason we have so many 3s, I attribute directly to our parks maintenance and operations staff. That we have a fantastic staff that's keeping our assets in really good shape, and replacing items and fixing things when they need to be replaced and fixed. However, there's a point at which in the life cycle at which an amenity or an asset within our city just needs to be renovated or replaced, where there's nothing more we can do operationally to keep that going, or if there is, it's the clock is ticking. And so those are the 4s and 5s that you see. We also have a good number of 1s and 2s. We have 12% of our park system is a 1. That means it's in fantastic shape. It has a long life ahead of it. It's going to serve our community for a long time. So on top of that work, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, the city did a full comprehensive ADA transition plan. And in that transition plan, there's a section of it that's devoted to parks. So this is separate work, but we wanted to pull this into the conversation tonight because it's an important part. Parallel to the condition assessment is the ADA transition assessment in transition plan. So you can see we have 26 different parks, natural areas, and greenways within that plan that are identified, with over 1,000 projects that are identified that need work, where items in our park system are not fully accessible. The total estimated cost that was within that document is around $2.5 million, just for the ADA transition portion of the work. So we wanted to pull this in. It's not part of our condition assessment, but it's an important part of the story to tell. So let's look at a few parks.
Ross, just a second. So just to expand on that just a second, the reason it's important to pull this in is because it's part of the funding picture, and just in terms of how we fund parks. And so that's why it's important, right? Thank you. Yes. Yeah. And another layer to that too. Yes, it's a funding picture, but it's also an accessibility issue, where if we can make our parks more accessible, it's one of our council goals. So let's look at ATFALATI Park really quickly. At ATFALATI Park, ADA, you'll see the ADA portion of it in the little badge on the screen. There are 136 ADA transition items that we need to attend to, and the total at ATFALATI Park is about 330,000. Separate from that, you'll see the condition scores, the 5s, 4s, 3s. So ATFALATI is largely a 4. That's where we see the peak in this graph. We have a lot of assets at ATFALATI Park that need attention. We have some, you'll see the 1s. We have a number of assets at ATFALATI Park that are in fantastic shape, like the playground we just replaced, that has yet to open up, but it will shortly, we hope. So the playground's a 1. The basketball court is a 5. So you can see on the images on the right, you can see that tape measure. That crack is on the basketball court itself. And so the basketball court needs attention. And the same thing, you can see the tennis court on the right. The tennis court is also a 5. Browns Ferry Park, largely 3s at Browns Ferry Park. We do have a good proportion that are 5s. These are the items that need our immediate attention, where they're just in disrepair. You can see the images, the bridge that we talked about previously at the council advance that's closed. The boardwalk, there's some projects with the boardwalk we need to pay attention to. And then there are things that are 1s, like the drinking fountain that we just replaced last summer. It's brand new.
And ADA, from the ADA assessment, there are 105 projects that are access issues at Browns Ferry Park. And at Tualatin Commons, Tualatin Commons, one of our main gathering places in our community. From an ADA perspective, we have 104 projects at Tualatin Commons. We have, from the condition assessment, it's largely forced. Tualatin Commons is it's so loved. It has a lot of needs. So you can see on this table that we have the drinking fountains that are there. They're old glass. They can't be replaced. They're 5s. The wave rail is a 2. It was just repainted and resurfaced a couple years ago. It's in really good shape. Has years of life left. And then the fountain, the splash pad, which is the project that we are just wrapping up the engineering work on that is going to be replaced. And then TCP, Tualatin Community Park, largely 3s. There are some amenities at TCP that are in need of attention. You can see the image on the right of the picnic or of the barbecue structure. It's structurally damaged. It has a giant crack in it. Things like that are throughout the park that need to come out. They need to be replaced. And the boat ramp is a 5. It needs to be re-engineered and rebuilt in the very near future. And then the trestle shelter, for example, it's a very new asset. It's a 2. All right, Jurgens Park. So Jurgens Park just had the off-leash area open up during COVID. So that is a 1. That is a fantastic. I was just there today. It's in fantastic shape, brand new off-leash area for our community. And we have assets at Jurgens Park that just need attention. You can see images of the poured in place surface at the playground that just needs to be replaced. It's old, cracking, much like we did at IBACH Park a year and a half ago. That same thing is going to happen at Jurgens Park, for sure. And then from an ADA perspective, we have 97 issues at Jurgens Park that we need to pay attention to. And then IBACH Park. IBACH, of course, we just redid the playground at IBACH. I just mentioned that. The playground at IBACH, the surface is brand new, and many of the play features are brand new. And so that has a lot of life left. And then, but the parking lot surface, this is an example of a 5, is cracked. It has, it just needs to have sections replaced. And so what's unique about IBACH too is it has 171 ADA items in our transition plan listed. And the reason we're sharing this with you is that this is our new approach. This is how we're looking at our whole system, and we're not just waiting until things are falling apart. We've identified them now. And so now that we have this data, we'll talk about what's next. So when we do this work, we're going to continue. This is not a one-time body of work. This is continuous. So every so often we'll update our asset scores as we replace or redevelop or renovate items throughout our system. Those will become 1s. And as we fix our 5s, those come off our list. So this is a continuous process. And then the next step is to bring back to you the cost estimates. What does this look like in terms of cost? That cost is key, because as we look back at the previous slides, we have a good number of 4s and 5s. Those are items that are in need of replacement or renovation now. And you saw, and I'll go back to this slide really quickly here. You saw the large number of 3s, assets that were scored a 3. That is the wave of 4s and 5s of our future. And so this is why we are intentional about it. If we wait until those are all 4s and 5s to do this work, we're in trouble. And so we're going to get ahead of that wave. So go back to our last slide here. The next step after we bring back estimates to you is the conversation about funding. So it costs X number of dollars. We'll bring back some ballpark estimates for planning purposes. It costs X number of dollars to complete our 4s and 5s, for example. We then ask ourselves, where do we start? There's over almost 800 assets that we've scored. Where do we start? And how do we make those decisions? And so there are a couple of key ways that we're going to look at how we prioritize. And one of those ways is on the next slide. So this is census data in a GIS layer. And what this shows is the darker orange color is our highest population of Hispanic and Latinx community members. And so as we think about how and when we're deploying dollars, our key gathering spaces in our community are what I like to call areas of equity opportunity. And as we think about where we invest our dollars and how we invest our dollars, looking at data like this is key in how we're planning to prioritize in alignment with your council vision. Another layer that we look at is this one, and this is again census data that shows income. So the darker the red, the lower the income. And so this is a little bit misleading in that it's a whole census tract section, right? So it's not indicative that whole area that in that dark red is all low income. However, the percentage is on average higher than other areas of our community. So we use layers like this to get at what is really at the core. It's at the core of our council vision and values and our city parks department values in our master plan. And that is that we are creating equitable spaces. And one way to create equitable spaces is to invest in renovating parks and gathering spaces in those areas. And so that's going to help us determine how we deploy those dollars and how we prioritize those investment decisions. So the next, as I mentioned before, the next step is we plan to come back to you with some ballpark estimates. What are the potential costs if we were to take care of these number 4s and 5s, these assets that are aged out in our system that's 25 to 30 years old? What does that look like? And so we can then talk about what are some options for funding and how do we start to take a bite out of this in a way that gets us in a position where we're not waiting for that wave to hit us down the road. And so we get ahead, we're intentional, we're strategic, and very equitable in how we deploy the resources. So I want to invite any questions you might have and clarify anything that wasn't clear.
All right. So if you could end the presentation so we can see people, then if we have to, we can pop back. Because I can only see a handful of folks right now if they have questions. So questions, Valerie.
I should unmute first. Well, I wondered, given a limited budget, would your idea be to first take care of the 4s and 5s and then look at maintaining the 3s? And I guess when you come back, I'd really like to see if you have the time, which I know that's limited, but what doing a higher level of maintenance on those 3s would be, as opposed to letting them slide into 4s and 5s where they need replacement.
Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. What I didn't differentiate is an important item, is that the 4s and 5s are really at a place where they need capital. They need the capital dollars. It's not necessarily the operating budget that's going to solve those 4s and 5s, but the 3s, we can extend the life of those 3s, and we're doing that. So for example, in the budget that's before you later tonight, there are several projects that help us extend the longevity of some of these amenities, like the Jurgens Park surface. So taking some dollars and redoing that surface now extends the life of that play amenity into the future. And so yes, absolutely, extending the life of the 3s and taking care of our 4s and 5s so we don't get into a place where we're in this emergency place of needing funding.
Bridget.
Hi, Ross, and everybody. Thank you very much for your presentation. I like the question that Valerie asked because I like that differentiation between operating budget and then where we're at with this stuff. And I just want to just appreciate you for giving us a high level overview of exactly what we're looking at. And it's not lost on me that we have more things in the 3, 4, 5 than we have in the 1, 2, 3. And when I think of parks, I don't want to think about crisis management and not taking care of our assets so that we lose value of the things that the taxpayers have paid for, that we all share, and that provides such an important part of our community and that's so well loved. I've said this before, but every time I've done interviews for anybody that's volunteering for committee, we always ask them what it is they enjoy about living in Tualatin. And I've never had someone say, did not mention the parks. The parks are always at the top of the list. I personally also want to thank you for bringing in the ADA conversation and the information about the census tracts, because that helps really give me a good visual. I'm not surprised at where they lay near the freeways. With a lot of exposure to environmental issues is where people that have less money end up living. And it's another reason that parks are so important. And then just to understand opportunities for funding. And so I guess really what I want to say is that I don't want to. I remember when that fence went up by the bridge, and that walking wasn't available. And that brings up two things for me, like, especially in this COVID time, I don't want to think of our parks as an area that we have to do crisis management. So a plan like this and a process like this of being proactive instead of reactive in crisis management around parks seems to me like a very good approach. So I really appreciate that. And then the second thing is, you know, safety issues and blocking off things that people should have access to is something I never want to see. And then to think about the limitations that I might have with part of the path that I like to walk, and all those numbers and numbers of places where someone that has disabilities are unable to walk. That's something that's really hits me and helps me think more broadly. So I just want to say those few things. Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Paul.
Yep, thank you. Unfortunately, I was unable to chat with Sherilyn about a lot of questions I have, so I don't expect an answer today, Ross, and nor do I want one right now. It's just some things to discuss as we move down the road. So let's just start at the very beginning with ATFALATI Park, which hopefully we're going to begin focusing on that, because even before I got on council, there were concerns about that park, specifically some repair concerns of things not being done, other than the softball field, which was completely resurfaced a couple of years ago. And we know that that is, as from your census map, as you so nicely pointed out, that is in an area where it really, we need to make an effort to focus on those areas first, I believe, because it is just really amazing how those areas seem to sometimes get left behind as we, for whatever reason, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus or taking any blame, but it's a fact that that park seems to need more repairs than some of the other parks. And so that's number one. Number two, your ADA assessment. You've got 1.4 million in ADA assessments, but I was confused because basketball court and tennis court is identified at ATFALATI Park as a 5, and yet I don't believe I'd be hard pressed to find those to be a ADA issue with respect to expense. And so can we clarify that right now? Is that an ADA number that's in there, or is that a separate issue?
Yeah, so the number on the slide for ATFALATI, so the total ADA cost for system-wide is about $2.5 million. We have about 336,000 in ADA assessment issues at ATFALATI Park. So the court surfaces, and I don't have the ADA transition plan in front of me. The court surfaces could be in the ADA transition plan as well. So we will bring that information back to you, whether it's included in that 2.5 million or not.
Thank you, because I know that one of my concerns when we discussed this, my gosh, it's probably back in November, it may even been earlier, and I know it was discussed at length in the master plan committee, and that is, and this is my issue and problem with looking at and I may be jumping ahead of the conversation here, and so again, we can talk about this later, and it probably is going to be another work session. But the funding source for this, a utility fee won't even begin to cover your ADA requirements, let alone your other maintenance and the other repair requirements. And so, because you're correct, when you look at the park system ADA assessment, you do have 2.5 million there, and then just isolated down on the parks that you highlighted, you're at 1.4 million out of that 2.5 million. And so, with respect, if you're asking the question, which I believe, hang on, let me get down here to the end, sorry. One of the questions that you want to ask is funding, and I think that probably is a 2-hour work session on its own, because I know that there was a very robust conversation and a lot of different opinions among the 6 counselors and the mayor as how the best way to fund that is. And so I will leave that discussion for another time. I just wanted to clarify what those repair costs were, because the ADA is really important. And I think Councilor Brooks made a very good point. It's something we really need to be aware of, and it's something we need to prioritize in terms of what needs to be fixed first, so that the parks can be enjoyed by everyone and not just a few. So in the interest of time, I'll leave.
Anything else? Any other questions, comments? Bridget, and then Nancy.
Sorry to double dip. After the conversation, something else came to mind for me as well. I had 2 questions actually. One was, I know we're looking at location specific, which, when we're talking about prioritizing parks and things like that. But I also know just from, working in architecture and design for a number of years, that if we're able to buy more at once, so if we did similar projects simultaneously, I know a lot of times that offsets costs because of how much we can get for those things. So I just want to talk about how we're thinking about these things financially, which I think this plan really helps a lot with, so that we can do things smartly like that. And then my other question was, just from the research I had done around the climate action plan and sustainability, I had learned about the double laminated wood, and I'm just curious about more durable but still renewable resources, and if we're looking to more updated things that will last longer and were not available when these first structures were first built, but still with a lens of safe and sustainable. Thanks.
Operational sustainability, absolutely. As we're making these improvements, let's make them so that we're financially and environmentally more sustainable in the long run. Absolutely.
Nancy.
Thanks. I had a couple questions. My first question is, and I might not understand this perfectly clearly, so I apologize if this is just my ignorance, but I thought a lot of the ADA projects and accommodations were things that we were legally required to do. And so I'm wondering, with, you know, 2.5 million in outstanding projects, if there's a mandatory completion, something out there that we have to get on these and get these done at any particular time, or in a, you know, like a time frame scope with all these, because it just seems like that's a lot of non-compliance when you start looking at the individual issues as well as the dollars. And then my second question is sort of the ADA and then an aging population, where those two things for access kind of start to cross over each other, and what your thoughts were on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. So yes, we have to show progress in the ADA transition plan. Within the plan, and Sean Brady probably knows more about this than I do, and our obligations and timelines.
Yeah. So I mean, as far as timelines, we're well past, you know, any timelines. You know, the ADA was enacted in 1991, and so that was supposed to, and just like every other city, we were supposed to keep on top of those changes as they go through, and most cities did not, and we are among them. But in light of that, what we are required to do is have an ADA transition plan and then work towards those improvements. And we are at legal risk, no doubt about it. Somebody could try to force us, but as long as we're working on those plans and we're putting money towards making improvements, that legal risk goes down, and so that's what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, and I can add too. It's and we included that information in part to show the need, but also to demonstrate that there's the reason that we have that pile of compliance issues is because we haven't had there's no funding source. Whereas streets, sidewalks there's a source to pay attention to that work. So I guess that's the need, is that with the source, we can make meaningful gains in that area.
Okay, that makes great sense. Thank you. And then I guess my request would be, as we're looking at these things, as these assessments, and looking at things that we need, I'm hoping that we can look at them also with like an aging population lens, so that things that are going to turn soon, that are going to end up sort of being like a double problem, that maybe we can add another category in some of these assessments and factor that in also, because I think that's a really important thing for us as a council to look at with, you know, the demographic composition of the city is like, yes, we have young people and young families here, but then we got a big swing over here of aging in place and older families, and, you know, a lot of things like bad lighting, cracked sidewalks, uneven stairs and steps, you know, no ramps, guardrails, you know, things like that. That's, you know, that ticks a number of different boxes when you're talking about accessibility. So I'd like to add a aging population spotlight to these problems.
Certainly, absolutely.
All right. Other questions or comments? I just have two real quick ones. So Ross, when do you anticipate coming up with that dollar amount and your prioritization, your suggested prioritization plan?
Yeah, so we are the NCS survey that's out right now includes a question about desires from our community for how to fund parks. So we want to bring that data to you around the time that you get that information back from the survey, so you can be best informed. Right now, we're aiming for late July or early August to bring those ballpark estimates of the 4s and 5s back to you.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Maria?
Yeah, I thought that the ADA, I just hate to come back to this bit. For some reason, I thought it was funded by, at one point, by another, like, I want to say another company or somebody funded that, or by the bond. I mean, there was some fund included in there, if I'm understanding correctly. And has that been done? And I know it wasn't, I don't know if that included the parks or not. I can't remember.
Yeah, so it does not. The funding sources that exist right now, with any ADA issues on sidewalks, there's a utility fee, right? And also in the bond projects, ADA improvements will be made as well. So for within the park system, that list I showed you, that total I showed you, is just within the park system, just within the parks themselves, where we don't have that dedicated source right now.
Anything else? All right. Well, thanks, Ross, for your presentation. And we'll move on to our next item, which I assume is still Rich and Ross, or along with Giselle, is the Veterans Memorial Concept Planning and Site Selection Report.
Yay!
All right. Thank you so much for that last item, and a really, truly exciting project. That was an item that you, council and mayor, felt strongly about last year and included in the budget for this fiscal year, the work to talk about what the Veterans Memorial is, the concept of a Veterans Memorial, and to identify a site within our city to place a Veterans Memorial. And so Rich Mueller was project manager on this work, and we teamed up with Shapiro Didway. And Giselle Champeau is also joining us. And so Giselle is going to walk through the really fantastic work that Rich and Giselle did to with the stakeholder advisory committee to get us to a fantastic place. So go ahead, Giselle.
Go ahead, Giselle. We can hear you.
You can hear me. Can you see my screen? I don't think you can.
Your face.
All right. Can you offer to share the screen again? Whoever the controller is.
Giselle, you have the ability to do that.
Oh.
Share screen.
Okay. Uh-oh. Well, we might have a problem. Let's see.
I'm losing my.
Rich, do you have access to pull that up?
I got it now. I'm sorry. Here we go.
Where am I losing my sound again?
Okay. You should see the screen now, correct?
Yep.
All right, awesome. So first of all, thank you. I'm glad to be here tonight to share the findings of this project, the Veterans Memorial project. My name is Giselle Champeau from Shapiro Didway Landscape Architects. Just to give you a little bit of background about the project, this is a planning level effort that focused on public outreach and confirming community sentiment and what the community wanted for a space like this in the community. The objectives were to develop themes, concepts, and objectives for this future memorial space. We took a look at a number of sites in which we did a site assessment for those sites and assessed whether they are suitable for such a memorial. We defined what the program should be for this future space, and then finally ended in a preferred site selection. And overall, the project took about 8 months to complete start to finish. A quick overview of the process. We'll dive a little bit deeper into some of these things. later in our meeting, but overall the meeting kicked off with a focus group sessions in which we engaged with multiple groups throughout the community to gather big ideas and kind of brainstorm the project. That led into a series of 3 rounds of community outreach. Each of those rounds consisted of a stakeholder meeting, a public meeting, and then a survey. Due to COVID, you can see in round 3, we had to cancel one of our public meetings, but all that information was then kind of assimilated into our public survey. The objective for round 1 was really development of themes and objectives. Round 2, we looked at sites, we looked at opportunities and constraints for those sites and different site alternatives. And then round 3, we developed the design program and selected that preferred site. Towards the bottom of the screen, you can see that all that information was then collected into a draft report. And then that report was shared with the stakeholder group, T-Park staff, for comment and review. We assimilated those revisions into the report, and that's what you were presented with, was a draft report for consideration and approval tonight. So a variety of methods were used for public information and notification. For example, online, a bilingual website was developed for the project. Numerous social media platforms were used to engage with the public and also to just make people aware of the project, including Facebook, Instagram, Nextdoor, email blast, tweet, etc. The project appeared in print, or we prepared as a team and as a city prepared numerous flyers and handouts to use for the project. Stakeholders use these to post them in different community gathering locations, as well as in different outreach events. And then also the project appeared in numerous media platforms, including the Tualatin Times, Tualatin Life, and Explore Tualatin. And then finally, the stakeholder group, the city, veterans organizations, consultant team, all went to great strides to build awareness for this project. And that was through a lot of personal outreach, whether it was through personal emails or phone calls, or the project was posted on an internal school website, for example. I'm having a hard time breathing, sorry. And it was also presented to the VFW Post newsletter. Give me 1 second. As you can see with the description on the screen here, a strong emphasis is placed on engaging with the Spanish-speaking community. So everything that was issued to the public was bilingual, including the website and any social media posts. Additionally, interpreting and translation services were provided at all public meetings. And then a day was spent at the Tualatin Public Library to pass out flyers and talk to the Latinx community. Next slide. So community outreach and engagement. So we talked a little bit about focus groups previously, and through the engagement process, over 900 people were engaged with. And that was really impressive, and it was really due to the efforts of a lot of people. The initial thrust started out with focus group discussions, in which local veterans, Tualatin Parks Advisory Committee, Tualatin Arts Advisory Committee, Tualatin Youth Advisory Committee, the Tualatin Diversity Task Force, the Veterans of Foreign War, and Forward Assist. We engaged with all those organizations to brainstorm the project. Outreach was also made at the Starry Nights event, in which over 200 people were contacted to discuss the project, and we shared or distributed information about the project, as well as the library pop-up we talked about before. From the focus group representatives, a stakeholder advisory committee group was formed, and that included not just representatives from those focus groups we engaged with, but it also included a diverse community representatives from Veterans Foreign Wars, as well as the mayor sat On the stakeholder advisory group, there was a representative from the student youth. There's several unaffiliated veterans who live and work in Tualatin. So it had a nice cross-section, represented the community as a whole. And then community engagement meetings. There was in all 2, due to one being canceled, 2 community engagement meetings. And then each of those are followed by 3 surveys, which really we saw a lot of response from. So here's a little bit of the data in regards to the surveys. Survey number 1. The intent of that survey was to gather community sentiment on themes from focus groups. So we had gotten lots of ideas from these brainstorming discussions. And so we wanted to see, what did the overall community feel about that feedback? So that was synthesized into a survey. 106 people participated in that survey, and 61 additional comments were collected from that survey. Veterans, then the survey number 2. This is the used to determine design themes, objectives, and who this memorial should honor. 320 people participated in that survey, and 37 additional comments came in. And finally, the Veterans Memorial Survey 3. The intent of this was to select a preferred site. 3 sites that we'll see later were shared with the public, and so the intent was to select that preferred site for the future memorial. 260 people participated with 79 additional comments. A big objective to the outreach effort was to define who and what the memorial should honor and who it should not. And so you can see this is a screenshot of the survey question answered that question. And you can see there's clear winners in the survey as to who it should honor. And that's consistent with all the surveys. There's very clear winners on what this project should move forward with and what it should not. So as you can see, who it should honor all military service members and branches, military family members, freedom and peace, not war, hidden heroes, civilian support. And really what came out of the comments from the public and what was consistent with the majority of stakeholders was also what it should not honor or not focus on. And so there's a strong message that this space should not emphasize war or glorify violence in any way. It should focus on service and a positive message. And there's a really strong preference to avoid overwhelming amounts of information, educational facts, but rather make it an inclusive space, something that's welcoming to all in the community. And then also not to focus on first responders and specific references to conflicts or people. So from now we know who and what the memorial should honor. And there was 5 core themes that this memorial should be centered around, as defined by the stakeholder group, and then through our second survey that we talked about. And so the major themes of what this memorial should be about are include connection, shared values, timelessness, engagement, and experience. And the objectives under those core themes were pretty clear, go in line with what we just talked about. It should emphasize things like sacrifice, honor families and others affected, demonstrate empathy and understanding for veterans' experiences, and it should celebrate community. And shared values, there was a lot of values that were brought forth, but service, respect, sacrifice, inclusivity, diversity, and honor were rated to be among the most important. The space was intended to be engaging. It should be a space for events and gatherings, a space for people to gather with picnic tables or benches, really encourage conversation and community and storytelling, and include an active recreation element. And also too, when it comes to timelessness, should honor the past, but also not compromise the future. So include past, present, and future. Talk about peaceful conflict resolution. It should be adaptable, able to evolve. And then the experience, it should be welcoming, create a sense of peace and memory, focus on positive, not violence, does not celebrate war, and interactive and engaging. So those were the 5 themes with supporting objectives that this memorial should be created around. So following this kind of second round, following the first round and the second round of our public outreach efforts, we focused on a site assessment of a variety of sites. So eight sites in all were looked at in detail and assessed by the consultant team. And we really looked at detailed data such as transportation, accessibility, parking, what was the tree cover on the site, what was the character of the site, was it passive or more of a developed site, what kind of noise was experienced within the space, was it highly visible into the space, was it visible when you're in that space looking out, and then other site-specific information. And then additionally, we relied on the public and stakeholders having experience and lived in communities and used these parks for what were the opportunities and constraints that we should consider when selecting sites to move forward with a site option. In addition, following basically the release of these eight sites to the stakeholder group for consideration of opportunities and constraints, we then developed a design program. And that design program, we looked at program elements, what the spatial metrics would be of those elements, program elements, what would be the spatial qualities, and then even started to talk about some preliminary design ideas. So for example, these different program elements, there's 10 in all. For example, a gathering space. It was decided that the gathering space should accommodate at least 50 people standing, 25 people sitting, and the character of that space would be flexible and open. Another program element, intimate and passive space with seating would accommodate 2 or 3 people. A space for solitude would have characteristics such as it would be quiet, it would be reflective, calming, peaceful. A space for personal storytelling, again, passive, so you can share those stories. It would include a dedication area that emphasized being inclusive to all, and opportunities for interpretive elements that perhaps would be a focus point or a focal point. Signage, parking for at least 25 cars, and close to public transportation. So taking those site opportunities and constraints, coupling that with the design program, the stakeholder group were tasked with reducing the options that would go to the public from 8 to 3. So these are the 3 sites that were presented to the public in a third survey: the Tualatin Commons, Browns Ferry Park, Sweet Pond Natural Area. And as you can see, for each of the sites, conceptual diagrams were developed, illustrating each of the program elements and how they could be arranged on that site given the scale of the site and the location of the site, etc. So the preferred site that was selected after we got the results of survey number 3 is Tualatin Commons. So here is a larger view of Tualatin Commons. I'm sure you're all familiar with Tualatin Commons. It's a great community space. Up here is a little key map up in the top right-hand corner. Our space for the Veterans Memorial was identified on the eastern edge of Tualatin Commons, and right across from the main plaza or gathering space with restrooms and other amenities. And this yellow line symbolizes the trail that goes around the lake. And so this is showing how the site can be accessed from the trail that goes around the lake, as well as entering from the parking area, and the arrangement or possible arrangement of some of these program elements. Again, this is very conceptual in nature. It was intended to help those taking the survey to start to visualize how a space could be developed, but in no means designed the space. So next steps. As we started the presentation, we talked about the intent of this project was, it was a planning level effort in which conceptual ideas were developed and the sentiment of the community was confirmed and understood. And so the next steps really involve design development at the Tualatin Commons site itself, in which the program is taken and real site design begins. That process would include another public engagement process. There's a lot of design ideas that have been documented in the report. And so this report really embodies and lays the groundwork for this design work to begin and to uphold what the public sentiment is in regards to what this space should embody. And then once that design development occurs, multiple schematic designs can be developed for this particular site, and preferred site or schematic design can be selected. Following that, they can use that preferred schematic design to determine construction costs. And then there's a lot of eagerness to go after funding from some of the veterans groups. And so identifying funding opportunities through organizations such as that, as well as from the city of Tualatin, would be part of the next steps. Any questions?
All right. So Giselle, can you end your share so we can see people? Right.
There you go.
So questions for Giselle or Rich or Ross? None? Okay, Valerie.
I always have to go first. Oh, I just wondered, and one of the things people wanted, it listed a recreation space, and what was kind of meant by that? It's kind of unclear to me what you would mean by that.
Good question. Good question. So they wanted a space where people could recreate, not necessarily something programmed, but maybe walk or exercise, something that was very flexible in nature. Maybe it would be adjacent to a trail system, for example, but it would not be any sort of programmed or specific recreation activity.
Okay.
Did you follow me?
Yes. Thank you.
Other questions? Robert.
Yeah, I see that Joe, Lipscomb, and Dale are on the line. Do they have any comments they want to make?
Not at this time.
Okay. So
I'll see where we go from here.
I just wanted to make sure you had the opportunity, Joe. So thanks for the presentation. It looks like you did a great deal of work and public engagement. I guess from my own experiences, which include going to Arlington and the local Willamette cemeteries and finding that a lot of value is the solitude that you can experience there, the quiet, there's nature, and there's a chance for reflection. And I'm concerned that those opportunities aren't available if this memorial is tucked in at the Commons, because there's so much more activity going on there. And I know these are all in your notes on the detailed data about the difficulties with parking, the lack of silence and an opportunity to reflect. And I look at the Sweet Pond site and see that it has a lot of those opportunities. And I know it's a little bit off the beaten path, but I wonder if some signage and some attention that would be put on it that could get people there would solve that minor problem, but provide the benefits of being a wide open space, one that's got parking, it's relatively close to public transportation, offers comfort, peace, calm, tranquility, really checks a lot of the boxes that you've had out there. So I'd like to put that up for discussion and maybe a little bit of understanding on, I realize that some more people voted for the Common site than the Sweet Pond site, but just in terms of the technical details, what some of those considerations were that led you to select the Commons over the pond.
So it was the public that selected the Commons over Sweet Pond. It was during that public engagement, that public process, that made that determination. Some of the things we heard was it's more visible, more people will visit it, more people know where it's at. There is parking and a connection to some of those other things that people desired.
Yeah, and Councilor Kellogg, I think your point is spot on. It was discussed at length as the stakeholder group talked about the attributes, the pros and cons of each site. That was very much discussed about Sweet Pond. One thing that's unique about Sweet Pond is just because it would be a linear experience. So as you walk around Sweet Pond, you would encounter sort of different elements of this Veterans Memorial. And so the part of the discussion at the key stakeholders group meeting was about that. There wasn't a central sort of gathering spot at Sweet Pond. It had to be experienced in the walk. And so that was one of the cons of Sweet Pond. But to your point, it was discussed at length in the stakeholder advisory committee, of which Joe Lipscomb and Dale Potts are both on. Fantastic level of commitment to this process, and Joe, with his passion for this project, really brought it to the point where it is now. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank Joe and Dale for their commitment through this process.
Councilor Kellogg, can you hear me? Am I on?
We can hear you, Jeff.
The several veterans, I presented all of these options to several veterans and veterans organizations. And by far, the majority of them, of all the sites, preferred the Commons. And that's the one they think can be developed into a placemaker war memorial site. And I use the word war memorial versus Veterans Memorial because we had wanted to talk about all of the wars that we were involved in. And there are more people involved in some of these things than just veterans. There's many people who serve that were not considered a veteran. And I presented some of that stuff in some of the reports already to the staff.
Okay. Maria.
I have a little bit of a concern of making sure we do this the right way and not get it, like with what's happening now, defacing things or spraying on things, or and I just hope that, I don't know when this was done. I remember the survey being done probably about 8-10 months ago. And so, I don't know, I'm just worried about that someone might want to, confuse it with something different and then want to damage or create some kind of, I hate to bring it up, but it is happening. And I don't know if we thought about that, and I hope that doesn't happen to us here in Tualatin. That was just my concern as I was listening to this.
I think that's something that could probably be addressed in design when they start designing a site. Keep in mind the things that have been happening recently, and so you minimize the disruption of the site in the event something like that does happen.
Right, because of the investment we're gonna do, and then
right,
it will be really devastating.
Mm-hmm. Other questions, Nancy?
Thank you. Thank you for all the hard work, and thank you for how many people had input and feedback. That was great to see the number of people. That's wonderful. My question is a little bit along the line of Councilor Kellogg's question, which is a question, I guess, of size and placement. That I like the idea of it being someplace that everyone would know where it is. It's somewhat easily accessible. There's, parking somewhat close. But I had sort of thought that one of the aims of placement would be the idea of it being like a gathering space, where if we wanted to have a Memorial Day celebration, or we wanted to do something like that, like we would have a little more space for gathering, and that abutment out into the pond, I'm just not sure if it would be large enough to accommodate very many people once we sort of built whatever the remembrance piece would look like. Or is it much larger than I'm remembering? Because I don't recall it being all that large.
Would you like me to speak to that from a design point of view?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Joe.
There is plenty of room. That's about 1.25 acres of property or something like that. There's plenty of room to have a spot for gatherings. There's plenty of room there to do the typical war memorial kind of thing that the veterans would be looking at. And there's also we have some opportunities here when we get into design. I've presented some ideas, but when we get into design, this is 2020, we're doing this in 2022, 2023. The world is different. And I think that there are only a very few memorials being built in the last 20 or 30 years that any of them have some of the things that the veterans groups had talked about incorporating into this site. And they all feel that it could be accommodated there very easily. The ones that I have talked to.
Well, that's great news. I'm happy to hear that. I hadn't thought, and I apologize, I just hadn't thought that was 1.3 acres. That's a lot more space than you thought.
We were concerned too about having an inviting environment, and there could be a very inviting walkway to bring you into that. The other thing we're concerned about is the space for veteran events. There's one every month, sometimes 2 a month, plus having a place for the community which could gather. And there are ways that place could be converted. And you're probably scrapping everything there and starting again, but we're using it for a different purpose.
Right.
And I think that I envision it having a lot of things in there about the women in all of the wars versus just the men that we normally find. And there's a tremendous opportunity to do that with that particular piece of property.
Bridget?
Thank you.
Okay, so my question is, as we're talking, first of all, I want to thank everybody for putting so much time and effort in, and close to 1,000 people responding is quite a lot. And, part of me knows that these discussions with City Council are very important. And at the same time, I just want to really acknowledge all the work that the committees have put in. And I don't want to sound like I'm nitpicking things or anything like that, because I really do like the idea of it being a community-led project, and I'm invested in that. But my question that came up while we were just having this part with Nancy was around the space. I don't have a hard time imagining a lot of people there because I've gone to the concerts on the Commons and have experienced the regatta. And then when you say everything would be scrapped and we would do events differently, I am just wondering if that means that it's going to affect programs that the community is invested in currently.
Yeah, great question, Counselor. So the area that this area is on the east side, adjacent to Lee's Kitchen. And so what's there right now there's an asphalt path and there's a bunch of vegetation. And so there's really, in this space, there's really not anything that will impact any events. If anything, adding this Veterans Memorial element to the Commons makes it even more of a gathering space. And we can do some really interesting, amazing things through the engagement process with the design phase of this project to figure out what that is exactly. But it's actually, I was out there, Rich and Tom and I were out there last week, and just putting our imagination lenses on, it could be really a neat space once we go through that process.
Do you have like a picture of the space that you could send us an email or something like that? Have you taken a picture?
Yeah, certainly. We'd be happy to send out a picture of that spot.
Thank you very much.
Bridget, I used the word scrapped, but what I'm saying is if we're going to put in a plaza and a common space, right now you have shrubs and trees and all of that stuff that you couldn't have that space. And that's why I used the word, scrapped.
Okay. Yeah.
I heard that, and then I also heard you say, there's there would be events going on for the veterans often, and I know that there's a lot of events that happen all the time, so it would be something that the city would have to think about.
As a memorial site, as a memorial site, if veteran groups, I belong to 2 veteran groups that meet in Wilsonville because that's the Korean War Memorial Site. And and we have 25, 30 people in any one of those events. But there are events every month of the year that are National Veteran Days, D-Day, Pearl Harbor Day. I mean, and veterans could use those. And so I could see veteran groups using this site the way that it would be designed.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could have something going on for the veterans every month of the year there, but it would be a one-day thing. And it's got to be utilized for the community, the other 30 days.
We got to move it on here, people. We're about 15 minutes behind. Paul has a question.
Yeah, real quick, because we are running out of time. But first off, I thank you for the presentation. And it obviously, as all the other counselors have said, very, very well thought out. There's a lot of effort that went into it. There's some interesting points that have been brought up. I think Councilor Kellogg brought up a really good one about reflection points. And my preference was always in looking at this and thinking about it was over at Browns Ferry Park. And I have 2 reasons for that. Number one, I believe it will be a destination point in of itself. We've seen this from others in the area. There are a few other memorials in the surrounding cities here, and we know what they do and what they bring to the city. My other concern with the Commons area is the future plans that we have periodically discussed. And I would be concerned just about as we get into developing that area, what that would do to something that we're putting so much time and effort, and by the way, is so past due. And I speak coming from a family with a huge past in the armed services. And so my preference would be that it be in its own area, that it generate its own central gathering point. But again, a great presentation, and I know, and I've heard, Joe, a lot of effort has gone into it with you and with Dale Potts, and I appreciate everything that you guys have done to bring this to the council and to move this forward, because as I just said, it's way overdue, but we're also way late, and so I will save my comments for later, Mayor.
Okay. I just want to wrap this up real quick. I want to thank the vets, non-vets, youth, the seniors who served on the committee, the folks who I think Ross and Rich put together a terrific steering committee that represented the community well, from age-wise, ethnicities, vet versus non-vet, and even within the veteran community, those veterans who just served recently and the veterans who served in the past, World War II, Korea and Vietnam. I was on the committee, and Giselle and her team did a terrific job coordinating the meeting and getting people on target. It just amazes me that one slide where she showed you the, bringing it up here on my machine here, the core themes and objectives. that was a lot of work, and it's just amazing that it's on one page. That took a tremendous amount of effort of the steering committee and the focus groups, and a lot of discussion to get those core themes and objectives. So I want to thank folks for that. And as far as the council concerns about the site selection, it was a long out, beat out battle, if you will, since this is a war memorial / veteran memorial, about those sites, and with folks going back and forth about which one was the best. And it came out pretty solidly, as Joe was mentioning, that they preferred the Commons over Sweek. Browns Ferry was pretty much dismissed pretty quickly because lack of access to it. There is no public transportation. There's not much parking, and it's kind of off the grid, if you will, into Tualatin. Whereas Sweek, is a nice site, but it doesn't consolidate the memorial like people would like. As Giselle mentioned, it's spread out, or it was Ross who said it. But we have some things here to ponder. We don't have to make a decision here tonight. This was informational. I know we'll probably see this again, and we can put our heads together and proceed. Like we said, the next thing would be coming up with designs and funding and all that good stuff. But I think the committee as a whole did a terrific job, and I want to appreciate them transitioning from when we had, old-fashioned meetings, if you will, to changing and transitioning to Zoom meetings and meetings that weren't in person, and everybody showed up. I've been on a lot of committees where half the committee doesn't show up. That wasn't the fact here. People showed up, they were involved, they were passionate, and everyone got a chance to say something. So with that, anything else on this? So we wrap up work session here. So we have a proclamation tonight. Who would like to do that proclamation?
Bridget. Oh yeah, the bees, yes.
Yeah, the bees, yeah. I figured you'd say that. So Bridget will do the bee proclamation. Are there any questions on the consent agenda?
I'll be pulling at least 2 items, Mayor.
All right. And since we're out of time for communications, we'll just directly transfer, if you will, into the city council meeting, and we'll have our council communications at the end of the council meeting. So we'll take cats here, and we'll change gears, and I will now call into session the Tualatin City Council meeting of June 22nd,